All right, welcome back to CAD to Cars. I am the moderator, Matt. Today we have Mr. Mike Day, Will,
Yep,
and Kevin.
Yes, sir.
Kyle Ferrari. We're just going to jump right into it, guys. We'll start with Kevin. Kevin, what is the most ridiculous mod you've done? And then would you do it again?
I don't know if I have one particular thing, but
as like I don't want to ridiculous as in the most you're embarrassed by,
I
or
suppose.
the most outlandish.
I think
That's-
either one works, really.
Yeah,
And
because I'm thinking I'm embarrassed by. It.
Oh yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
What don't you want anybody else to know about?
Right.
I don't know if there's anything I don't want anyone else to know about, but my views have kind of changed a lot. And I guess my whole experience with my B5 was kind of the most ridiculous thing I've really done to a car. Mostly in the fact that it was wrapped in a Tiffany blue vinyl wrap. So super big, like attention grabber, but not something I'm really interested in anymore at all.
Plus, I also feel like you don't regret that at all.
Right. That's different. Yeah. It's well. I mean, that's fine. You don't regret it, but like
I wouldn't do
I
it
thought it was a
again.
cool
you wouldn't
car.
do it again.
Really?
But like
That was a
at the
cool
same
car.
time, if had you not done it, you probably would. Like if somebody
Maybe.
kind of had to get out of
Had
the
to
way.
get it out of the way. Yeah,
That's true.
a little
But
phase.
it really
We all go
was
through the
just like
phase.
a
Yeah.
look at me, like attention grabber color thing that I'm not really about anymore. So,
Why that color?
well, I actually ordered a different color for it in the first place. So I had ordered like a darker green similar to something like a cactus green in an Audi, which is a super classy color, looks really cool. And then it just showed up one day. My order was late in the first place, and I had my friends come out from Connecticut to vinyl wrap it with me. They were going to help. I have some buddies that work at sign shops. They're pretty good vinyl, and they were on their way out. And the day before, or actually it might have even shown up while they were on their way out, the wrap showed up, and it was the wrong color. It was a Tiffany blue, Tiffany green, whatever you want to, seafoam green. And I just decided to go with it and thought it looked really cool at the time. But it was on the ridiculous side, really, just the color in general.
What
So-
about a technical, like something you built for your car that you wouldn't do it again?
I mean, go for the same thing where that car was on air ride. Seemed kind of cool. Seemed kind of practical. Wanted the stance boy look. I got it, but I mean, that's another thing that it's not that ridiculous really, but for some people going that far is not somewhere they're willing to go at least, but I don't know. What do you think?
Because I don't have a problem with air ride either, though. But
Yeah,
like,
right.
I don't want an air ride car, much like you do, but like an air ride bag dually or something. I could get all over every single time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
maybe once I get that bug out of my system, I'll change my tune. But so I don't have a problem with air ride necessarily.
Yeah, it's on the conservative side of ridiculous, but
Right.
I really haven't explored too much in the ridiculous end of things. Like, I haven't driven or haven't built a rear-wheel drive Mark III. That's on the ridiculous side, not in
That
a
is
bad
a-
way.
Right.
That's like
That's why I was asking too. Is
that's,
like, how do we classify? I feel like I try to. I don't know. Kind of my intent is to sort of walk that line and
Mhm.
push the boundaries, but
right. Yeah.
in a way I'm not embarrassed by.
Right.
So
Well, yeah, we definitely find ridiculous very cool. So
yeah,
in
ridiculous.
a sense,
and
it's
weird
not
are
even
good.
ridiculous to us. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, I'm thinking more along the lines that I'm sure you guys probably both agree that like every time I either try something new, like a new project in general, or just making something that I've never made before. I mean, by the time you get it finished, like you almost want to do it over.
Oh,
'cause,
every
you know,
time.
You figure out what works and what doesn't, and you know you just finally figure out how to. I mean, by the time you get done any big welding project, you're like just that much better at welding, and you're like, well, see, look at where you started, and it looks like shit. So, I mean, that in a sense is kind of like how every project goes.
Yep.
For me, like it's like you could look back at like each of the cars that I've owned and each of the things that I've done on that were like pretty embarrassing overall. Like just going way back, like to when I was like 15 or 16, and like the first things that I did to my cars were really bad. Like really Need for Speed, the interior lights and all that stupid stuff. Like
Okay.
that's super embarrassing to me.
Okay.
I mean, if you
Yeah.
look like in like the way I wired that stuff, like
Oh, boy.
wiring, ooh,
Yes.
Twist
boy.
together with electrical
Oh
tape
my
and all
god,
this stuff.
that's horrifying to think about.
I guess that kind of does bring me back to some of my first car was a Nissan Altima
Mhm.
that my dad handed down to me because he wanted to buy a new one, and the trade-in value on a Nissan Altima after he had driven it for years back and forth to work was like $1,000 at the most. So that was my first car,
Mhm.
and there's not a lot of
Exactly.
aftermarket. There's not a lot of following in the Nissan Altima world, but that's what I had, and I think
Oh, yeah.
that's where everyone usually
Yeah.
starts.
Yep.
And
I had a hand-me-down
I think-
92 Camry from my parents. It was a
Nice.
V6, but
Oh, yeah, right.
again, it's a Camry. I mean,
Manual
wait,
or auto?
it was automatic.
I
Yeah.
can't win them all.
I had a manual, so that at least
Well,
that
hey,
going
had
for
that
me.
going for
Yeah,
you.
that's not bad.
But I easily got into like stereo stuff because I didn't know what else
Yep.
to kind of do. So
Somehow I skipped that whole phase.
my dad was an electrical engineer also, so that kind of prompted things. He knew some stuff about wiring and kind of wanted to teach me a little bit about it, but that was really the only thing I had to modify. So I
Mhm.
really didn't get that far into it, mostly just because I didn't have money.
Right.
But after that, my first car that I bought for myself was a B5 A4. And that's how I got into the whole B5 thing in the first place. And everything I did with that car was, pretty budget, pretty standard, coilovers, wheels, turbo, inlet, tune type of thing that I would still do today. So
Will, do you have a specific thing that you can kind of explain a little
Yeah, I
deeper?
feel like you've hinted at this.
Yeah,
a
you
little
said
bit.
generally you have embarrassing things, but I want something specific.
I'd really like you to do this
So,
first.
well, it's kind of a progression leading up to probably, in my mind, one of the more ridiculous things, if not the most ridiculous thing. And, like Kevin said, it kind of started out with the first car, the Camry. And, I did what I could to that car, and it was, some ricey things, interior lights, stupid stuff like that. It did do the whole sound system, subs in the trunk and everything. And I, thinking back on it, I was actually kind of surprised how deep I dug into that. Like while working with a budget, like I went through the effort of, setting up an amp properly and like ohming out the outputs and the gain and, fine tuning all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, eventually, that car died. And I got a 96 Civic, which was a manual, fortunately, and, went through the whole DIY turbo situation on that. And so I really, didn't want to spend the money. I saved up some I think I had $500 and I pretty much turboed that thing for $500, bought some, schedule weld L's, and I went and specifically bought I didn't know a whole lot about welding either. Thought I could do it with a stick welder. So I built a tubular manifold out of weld L's and a stick welder. And
That's
so
impressive.
I'm not going to say that it was the most beautiful thing in the world, but I did it. And I am proud of that in a way.
it could have been, NPT fittings for
Right.
plumbing stuff from Home Depot.
Yeah,
I think a black pipe manifold probably would have been a smarter move.
Might have been more
and done
expensive.
just as well. I don't know. I spent money on the stainless weld L's.
Ooh.
So-
You stick welded stainless?
Yes.
Okay.
It didn't rust.
With the like stainless rod and everything?
Yeah.
All right.
So that was interesting. I think I still can't stick weld, but anyways, respect to those guys because that is incredibly hard.
Yeah.
Uh,
Pipe welders.
yeah.
that
Oh my
do
God.
Crazy stick weld stuff.
anyways, that brings me to there was one point shortly after I had gotten that car done, I had a couple buddies ask me like, "Oh, hey, we're going down to the drag strip," and they were going in their Mustangs and everything, and I was like, what the hell? Not really into drag racing, but they were going, so I was like, all right, I'll go. But so I'm thinking, as I had this downpipe built and an exhaust and everything, but I'm like, oh, these Mustang guys are going. Like, I want this car to be fast. So we were like a couple hours out, and I was trying to figure out how to make like basically an open downpipe or a cutout with the stuff I had laying around. So I had an old throttle body laying around.
Yep.
And so I drilled using a hole saw into the side of my downpipe, which actually didn't leak or anything. So I ruined it essentially. Hole sawed into the side of it and welded a pipe on and sleeve clamped a throttle body onto my downpipe and ran a choke cable into the cabin. So I was choking because I was driving the car down there too, and it was stupid loud. And so choke cable into the cabin, open down pipe, and took it to the drag strip. So.
I have to give you some credit there because a lot of people I grew up around just wouldn't have gone through the effort of having any type of thing you could close off to make it quiet.
100% would have just been a cut off downpipe and run.
Well, see, I think I thought it was cool in theory. Execution was really poor. It looked horrible and janky, but the thought was in, it just kind of circles back to us being design engineers and wanting to make something that just is the best of both worlds.
But it worked.
It did work.
So.
Yeah.
How do you perform drag racing?
Very poorly. Although I think that might have been like my first time ever at a drag strip. The car, it was self-tuned, and I made one pass, blew the tires off, waited in line. As you guys know, you remember back Winter Beater when we went to Hangover Nationals. We were there for hours, made a pass, went in line again, there for several more hours, went to make a second pass and blew a charge pipe the second run, and then they closed. So I think I ran like a 14.2 or something like that in there. So pretty bad, but it was an overall fun story. So I'm not mad about it.
All right, Mike, how about you?
I don't know. I still I can think of the vehicle I'm most embarrassed to have modified.
We haven't hit on, since we all brought it up. First car ever.
First car ever. 1994 Chrysler LHS. I got from my aunt.
Ooh.
Did you modify it?
No, I think I blacked out some trim. I did blow the motor junior year. I spun a rod bearing trying to be full hot rod and leaving work on the limiter, and it spun a bearing dead cold because that's what happens.
Yeah, they don't like
So my dad went to the junkyard and got a replacement motor. I put it in without touching the timing belt, without changing the oil, just put it in. I didn't know that you had to leave the torque converter in the trans or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I put it on the motor and fought it for a day trying to get it lined up. And somehow I did. Somehow I didn't nick any seals in there. Put it together, ran. I drove it for a week, and it was running kind of warm. Then I changed the oil after I realized it was super thin and it was still on the junkyard oil.
Oh.
And then it cooled off and ran a
I
half
was gonna
temp.
say junkyard rainwater or something like
Yeah,
that.
it was
likely what was
all
in it.
fuel or something. It was not good. But yeah, I drove it for the rest of high school and no issues other than I had to open the AC when I did the motor.
Mm-hmm.
What else did I do? I also, a spring perch on the rear is like a McPherson rear suspension thing. I was riding home from school with my buddy and we hit this little bump, kind of like a jump. And the spring perch was rusty and it completely collapsed, landed on the tire, went through the tire. And then I just welded to the outside of the shock and braced it back up and ran it like that for the rest of the time I had it. And somehow it was fine.
All right.
I don't know. Yeah. So I didn't modify it really.
So what vehicle did you have in mind that would be your most embarrassing or ridiculous mod?
So there's two ridiculous ones. One of which I'm proud of, and the other one I learned a lot, and I'm glad it's gone. So my first major project, so I had my E34 as my second car, and then I bought my E30 that I made into a pickup truck. So that was kind of ridiculous. And that was an automatic car that I swapped to a manual, and I motor swapped it, and then turbo swapped it. I did a 24 valve swap, and then made my own manifold with stainless weld L's, but I MIG welded it.
Good for you.
And it came out really bad. I still have the manifold.
Do you?
It's a trophy of shame.
I tried to see if my old car was floating around up there at one point just to see if I could find any pictures of it because I kind of would like to have that back. But
But yeah, that one I was proud of. It's the perfect example of learning too much and then hating everything you did.
Mm-hmm.
So I built it, I don't know, 2008 or something like that. And then I had it up until 2 years ago. I even drug it out here when I moved. But there was so much bad fab work that I had done that I wanted to do over. I decided to
it's
just
not even worth
pass.
it.
I'd be better off getting a new shell and doing it over.
Mhm.
But I learned a lot, and that was great.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I was kind of proud of what I did with it at the time.
Mhm.
But it was all flux core, MIG welded,
Oh, yeah.
sheet metal.
That's well
body
beyond
work.
what I was doing at that time. We were, building the crappy go-kart in the transportation shop, last minute. Nobody even knew what was going on. We were going to race go-karts in the back of the school and slammed it all together in the last 3 days because nobody had any type of timeline or deadline or anything like that. But like that was my welding project back
Yep.
then, was like a very square flat frame that had already been laid out.
Square.
So
I did that.
you're
too,
swapping
but-
motors and welding manifolds, and I'm over here like
Well, that's
putting a
stuff I
brazen
did, but like,
string.
I did that, but like right into high school. Like I asked for a welder for Christmas. It was a flux core MIG that I still have, and I
You?
like that MIG I have. It was flux core,
Okay.
but no.
That's a pretty nice first welder.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty good. Thanks,
as
Sansa.
a teenager, my friends and I were very afraid of diving in deep on things.
Right.
So putting coilovers on a car was like, oh, all right, we're gonna jump in, figure this out, and that was like a big dive for us.
Right.
So
It's come a long way.
Yeah.
yeah, things change when you hang out with different people.
For sure.
Why would you want to make it into a pickup truck?
I had this like very weak justification other than like so back in the day, BMW made an E30 pickup truck as like a little parts runner on the factory. They made one of them, and like
Wow.
it didn't look very good. I'm like, man, it'd be cool to build something like that, make it look like a little more finished. So that was kind of my intent behind it. And like I was working on my E34, and I wanted something to just like go grab parts with. I didn't need a big truck or anything. I didn't have any money, so I grabbed. It was I think I paid $150 for an E30 that had been hit in the nose, but I drove it home. So like the fender and hood were smashed, but I drove it home like 45 minutes and had like no real interior. I don't know, but and that was the perfect project. Like within 3 days of having it at home, I had cut the back off it. So I wanted to like commit, because otherwise I'd get attached to the car and want it as a car. Like nope, gotta cut it now.
I mean, in all honesty, why wouldn't you want a pickup truck?
Right.
It's lighter. It's got utility. I
Right.
mean,
Fair.
as long as you keep all the functions of the car in the first place, besides the rear seats, which, I mean,
Right.
really, how often do you need those?
Yeah.
Rear seats are bad because then you just get roped into driving everywhere.
Right.
All your friends and stuff. So
Yeah, look at me going to lunch. I
Look
don't
at you.
drive ever
Right.
anymore.
Right.
Took apart my one car with 4 doors.
I had a Mazda MX-6 was my first car,
Nice.
5-speed. I was hoping for a 240 SX,
Yeah.
but I couldn't afford that, so I went with the Mazda MX-6.
that's a close second.
$1,500. Yeah, close second.
Yeah.
Front wheel drive. Put 19-inch NK
Yeah.
NK wheels on it and a 15-inch subwoofer, and
Nice.
that was me. That's all I did though.
I think that
I
was-
did not dive into anything.
That was really just like where you started in
Oh, absolutely.
2006.
Yep.
Yep.
2000, I don't know when you were there, but
2004.
for us, you know,
2006 was
Yeah.
early 2000s, like modifying cars was, yeah, throw some
So-
sick graphics on it, black out the taillights, whatever,
Oh boy.
throw
Did
some
I
throw
still
some
have those,
stereos
too.
in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the most embarrassing one was my 4Runner. So I grabbed a cheap 4Runner and like lifted it way too tall, trying to like get into off-road stuff, and just ruined it. It was. I learned a lot, but it was bad. I did like a solid axle swap and stuff. There were some interesting things, but it was very poorly done.
Or
So
execution.
your
yeah.
most
yeah.
embarrassing mod was ruining a 4Runner.
Not ruining it, but like that I drove that around as a thing. That's what's embarrassing.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Would you try the truck again?
Yes, for sure. And that was why I held on to it so long, because I wanted to redo it and like actually make it a thing. The idea is still there, like, and now I've thought about it over the course of well over 10 years now, just trying to perfect the thought. I think I could do it way quicker and way better now.
Yeah, but the downside of that is we've come so far between that period of time where it was like acceptable to kind of just like get into it with like the basics and the little suspension lifts and body lifts and things like that. And like now I'm thinking to what you're saying, I'm like, man, if I did get my hands on something like that, I know that I'd want to do it all and do it right the first time, which is much more expensive.
Oh yeah,
So-
yeah, that's true too.
That's the really unfortunate part about doing stuff now is that
Yeah,
you're not
back
going to
then
waste
when-
your time on spending money on the little.
It was kind of refreshing to have that like limitation when we were younger
Yeah.
of having like no money to do this.
Right.
It's like, well, I have to do this. Like,
Especially now because it was an excuse.
Right,
Too.
it's an
Like, and we can
excuse,
still
like-
use it as an excuse. Yeah, I don't have any money. I was 15, but
right.
like,
Even now, like, I never would have bought the new fender for $200. I would have like spent
Right.
3 days welding shit to it to make it straight again or something. And now, like, why
getting the
didn't I
bean
spend
bag and the ball
$200?
peen
Like,
hammer or something like that.
Right.
Like,
It'd just be miserable, but I don't know. It's how you learn.
Yep.
So what's the most ridiculous mod you've seen out there in the world?
I don't know.
Car shows, races.
Most ridiculous. That's hard to
Boy,
pinpoint.
it's so subjective. Yeah, I mean, everybody
So,
has their own taste, and I
as a
try
grouping,
not to hate it.
The,
But
the grouping I understand the least is like the big bulldozers.
yeah,
That's the one that, like, I have very little understanding of. That like none of it clicks.
Tolerance or understand it?
It's not the tolerance. It's just like, I appreciate a lot of different aspects of cars. Like donks and stuff are funny. Like there's so many things that are like, if it's done well, it's cool. I don't really care. I don't need one, but it's interesting. Those are the one I'm like, I don't get it. It's as close as I get to being like, nah.
A big brodozer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like it's more kind of West Coast giant lifted trucks.
Oh,
with,
okay.
like super polished, stretched off-road tires that don't make sense, and they're like bagged so you can change the height like 15 inches, but like it's still too tall.
Mhm.
yeah.
And then there's like sound systems underneath stuff and lights under things and links that don't
Took
like
a
the
trope.
geometry doesn't make
see,
sense.
that's the thing. If you can modify something to an extent where it's better at something that it wasn't meant for to begin with, or better at what it was intended for, just overall. But like that just makes everything worse.
It's good at nothing.
Nothing.
Like that's the thing. Like
Right.
there's no redeeming quality.
No, it's not a better truck. It's not a better car. It's
Right.
not.
It's
Doesn't.
not good at off-road things, and like it would have been better stock.
And then here
It's-
comes like the opinion factor, but it doesn't look good either. But,
right. Yeah, it's to be
That's-
flashy
I
among
think-
that crowd only.
There's a big opinion factor there because there's a big following of that
Yeah,
stuff.
no,
Oh,
I know
it's huge.
people are into
It's
it.
a huge market, and that's the one I just don't get. So
It's the
Okay.
same people that have the opposite opinion about like lowered cars usually.
yeah,
You know,
like the stance car, they have the same argument against the stance car for
Right.
sure.
mega camber,
Right.
which
And it all stems from the same thing. So like if you're riding around town in it, you're gonna smile because it's funny. That's the thing. Like if you all pull up to the light in a big giant brodozer, or a slammed Civic that's making sparks as you pull up to the light static.
Right.
Either way, you're laughing with your friends, and that's kind of what it's all about. But
doesn't mean you get it.
that doesn't mean I need to do it. And the brodozer is the one I'll pass on.
that's a large group of
That's a
modification
big
being
category.
ridiculous.
Well, like it's hard to pinpoint one thing that I'm like, well, that's just not going to be okay.
Yeah.
I could pick one on each car. That they
Is it my turn?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, because
you
I
can go.
Something that caught my attention this year at H2O was the strong presence of crackle pop tunes. And
Yeah,
just
that's a good one.
it used to be about like if a car backfired and made a loud pop or whatever, that was a car that was like, whoa, that thing's probably making some serious power. That thing's cool. And now it's like, oh, does he have a crackle pop tune that pops until you until you come to a complete stop, basically? Just
Well-
30 seconds of 4-cylinder turbo Ford Fiestas or whatever it is, just going down to a light, just pop, 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 pop. You're just like, okay, that's enough.
It's,
I'm
it's
in full agreement with you here.
because it's intentional,
Right.
right?
If
is the
you're
problem.
if fireballs and like pop crackles on D-cell and stuff, when it's a byproduct of
Mhm.
making a ton of power,
Right.
that's cool.
Well-
Or if it's something that is in such poor shape that that's what's happening.
the
That's
uncle
also funny.
Buck car, yeah, like that's
funny too.
hilarious.
I'm completely down with that. But a forced presence like that.
The one
not
thing
okay.
I will stand for on that is Mark IV 1.8T's two-step because it's
hate
just
that.
ungodly loud.
That doesn't. Yeah, it is ungodly loud, and they still make 12 horsepower. So
Right. But it's at that level of, okay, this actually sounds like gunshots. I can get on board with that. Just for this.
It's so ridiculous that it's funny.
Right.
Yeah.
You can get to a point of ridiculous and have it be, appreciative because they go that far with it. And you're like, how is that exhaust not falling off that car completely? I don't understand how it's still together. But the little pops, the little add-on crackles that, aren't really real, they're just kind of simulated, just doesn't do it for me.
Well, anything?
Man,
No?
I'm in a wholehearted agreement with everything we've talked about thus far, and I don't know. I think, man, I don't know that anything else in particular jumps out at me as like like at least a talking point in terms of.
Are you gonna go down the stance route? Do we touch on that too? Because like,
No,
there's
I'm
aspects of
okay with.
that,
I'm
I'm into the stance. I'm not into the camber thing.
right, and
When
I
people
mean,
do the like.
I was going to ask why. It's to get the car as low as possible, correct?
That's what
Well,
it used to be,
it's
like
the-
when it was
well-
fitment and getting the car low. But now there's the excessive camber that you see a lot of. I don't know. It seems like GDM wise.
it's
where it started, but-
a competition at that point among that crowd, right? Like, how many degrees of camber do you have? And I guess I understand why it happened. You know, it all starts out with like, you know, race cars. Like the only reason you need camber for anything ever is, you know, race cars. And then, you know, you start lowering stuff. And then, yeah, I guess what did they go crazy with it at a certain point to avoid having to actually modify a body to get it lower than that? You know,
Yeah,
it's
to
tough
fit-
stuff, right? So you get more
nice
camber.
wheels
Mhm.
that came in whatever size you found and trying to fit them.
Right, you roll your fenders as far as they possibly go, and then you got to to get it to fit again. So you throw more camber in it. Like I get that it's the victim. It's a victim of circumstance up until a point.
Yeah, that's not 10 degrees.
Beyond that,
Right,
I'm not
exactly.
okay with it, of course.
Yeah.
but
5 degrees or less is like stance car. It seems okay, and then 10 degrees, you're on sidewall.
but again, like that's what I'm thinking. Like among that crowd, I'm like, okay, whatever. If you're into it, go for it. Because I think it's that thing. It's so ridiculous that it's funny, and it's almost like a competition. So I guess
I think it's the other side of ridiculous that we just
it
haven't
doesn't like
touched on.
infuriate me when I see it. I don't get it, but it's fine.
Right.
It's fine with me. Teach their own.
Right.
We'll let this one slide.
Yeah, I'll let it go. We don't want to lose all of our listeners that quickly,
Right.
so you were really knocking them down here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talk about a lot of technical things. Let's talk about what you guys do here at ECS. You each design parts.
Yeah, which might be a little terrifying now that you've heard some of the ridiculous stuff that we've done. But that's why we're here. You know, it's like we learned how not to do it.
Right.
So, Will, let's start with you. You design Volkswagen parts. Can you tell us about perhaps a project that you're working on now? You don't have to give us a lot of details if it's kind of secret, but
Yeah.
something you're interested in.
Nothing secret, really. If anything, we get a little hesitant with releasing too much information about what we're working on because the design process and prototyping and all that it takes a lot of time. So we're don't want to get people too worked up about something before it's really ready. Of course,
Right.
the natural part of the process is changes, and that all takes time. So nothing's really a big secret, though. But I mean, in general, like there's so many different types of products we develop. Anything from aesthetic carbon fiber accent pieces, exterior parts that have no function other than looks, to skid plates and performance parts. So I guess one that I'm currently excited to have moving forward, actually just finished up some dyno runs today, is fabricated intake manifold for Mark 5, 6, and 7. I think it started out with a previous Volkswagen engineer. Shout out to Adam. And then I kind of took that over. And I think it's a really cool project. I mean, it's pretty high up on the scale of complexity and, just, in the tier of expensive parts, that you spend on your car. It's pretty high up there. And, a lot of effort went into developing the part, which is cool in my opinion, simulating, airflow characteristics through a manifold and, figuring that all out, I think is a lot of fun.
So maybe for someone, there's a couple different design processes depending on whether we're doing a skid plate, an intake manifold, or like a carbon fiber part. But if you were going to give a rundown of what your design process was for that intake manifold, how would you describe that?
Oh boy, I mean,
tricky.
this is going to be very tricky, and for Volkswagens in particular, it's a much more elaborate process because of this. Well, because of all the shared components. I mean, there's so much opportunity, and although it's difficult to know upfront, but so much opportunity for one specific part to fit a lot of different cars with Volkswagens. The TSIs and FSIs, they're shared in between so many different platforms, the Jettas and the GTIs and the Golf Rs and everything. So it's a little more drawn out. The initial stage of figuring out, how to design a part for Volkswagens in particular, I would say a little more so than the BMWs and the Audis.
I mean, it's the same thing, but you have to go in more
the
depth.
process
so, like,
is the same.
Your first step, though, is like packaging constraints.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you have to check 6 applications,
Exactly. So that's what I was
assess
getting
your
into,
packaging
yeah.
constraints.
Mhm.
Which one has the oil filter that's slightly in the way, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was getting into, is that, obviously first step is to figure out kind of what you're working with, and for that in particular, I was looking to get as many core applications as possible into the shop, taken apart, and then scanned. So a big design tool that we all use is our Ferro arm, and we use that for 3D scanning and modeling. So we gather a lot of information from that. We scan at different stages of even disassembling the car. So, we'll get it in, I'll pop the hood, and we'll just scan the engine bay as it sits, factory fresh. We know where everything is from the factory.
And close the hood, too. Oh,
and
bottom of the hood. Close the
good
hood.
call. Yeah, close the hood, which is always interesting. Definitely got to consider,
Easily
where
forgotten.
it
Easily
sure
forgotten.
is. Yeah. Where the hood strut's going to rest in the engine bay. You got to make sure you're not falling into that space, and, the liner and everything, especially when we make intake boxes. We're having weather stripping going up and meeting the hood, so we want to follow those contours and everything. So, boy, this is a really tough question to really explain, like start to finish. It's like, we do it every day, so I mean, it's hard to kind of not breeze through it and say how this all
We've done it
works.
for so long at this point.
So I guess what kind of threw me off here is he asked me about a project that I'm excited about, and so
You picked the most complicated one.
that's kind of what I'm getting at. So maybe
cool,
let's
though.
come back to that one. And Mike, you started a design project today.
Yeah, one of the more simple ones.
So square one. We'll start with that.
All right, so I started scanning for a skid plate project today. So the process for doing that is, assessing the applications. In this case, I really only have one application. There is like a year split, so I'm going to have to scan both of those. But I brought the car in, 3D scanned the skid plate and, the bumper and subframe, everything that you can see without touching it first, with the skid plate in its mounted, the factory belly pan in its factory location, just all the screws, all the stuff, which I scanned Kevin's car today, missed a couple screws, but you get to scan past where you're going, because you need to be able to align your data together. So you need to scan areas that you're not going to alter and areas that you are going to alter. So in this case, I needed to scan outside the factory belly pan, which includes bumpers and splash guards and stuff, and then remove the belly pan and scan the chassis again, so that I know what's behind it and where I can move things to. And I can pick all my mounting locations. So once we get the scan data all figured out and into Polyworks, which is the software we use to kind of analyze that data, I'll make planes and highlight all my mounting areas for screws and wherever I decide is the best location to mount brackets before bringing it to SolidWorks. So I'll define all those areas, bring it to SolidWorks, and just start. I don't know, the design process for that can kind of is whatever.
We all do
strikes
that
your
one a little
fancy
bit differently. Yeah.
when you get to it. It's like I try to pick the flattest area, like the area I'm least likely to change. So that way, that's my base flange of the sheet metal stuff. Because then you change a couple angles of other bends, and the whole part tries to move around too much.
Right.
That's kind of a unique part about what we do here, is that we have such a diverse range of products that we work on, and you really have to have a good understanding about manufacturing processes of vacuum forming, sheet metal bending, CNC work, welding, coating after finishing, whatever it is. Like the list goes on of number of possibilities of like process issues you can run into if you don't design a part right. And a lot of it's a learning process. A lot of us have been here longer than others, and the longer you've been here and the more experience you get in different areas, you really pick up a lot.
You learn the painful way. It's,
yeah.
This part, I have a tolerance issue with this tab because of the way it's bent compared to the others. And
Right.
before you know it, you have to pull all of a product line off a shelf to re-inspect or something that's miserable. That's not what you want to do. So,
But also you use your previous experience, use your
for
hands-on experience, and you say, okay, I'm going to try to make this thing the best way I can based on what I know. And sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes it does. And when it doesn't, you learn from it.
Right.
The same way that we started doing poor modifications earlier, learning how to do that. And here we are now knowing a lot more about how to design something, how to make something so you know how to design it. If you don't know how to make it, you really can't design it well.
And on the same page as that, back to how we started, a lot of this is also cost driven to some extent. So we have to make a part that people will buy, that we can manufacture and people will buy for that price point. So it's tempting to try to make the best product available for it, but no one's going to buy a $2,000 skid plate. So it's
a game of compromises. Yeah. So,
Kev, are you working on a project that you're excited about, or one maybe in the past that you're really proud of?
I guess what I'm well known for here is the exterior stuff that I've worked on. So diffusers, spoilers, things like that, just kind of the more organic shape things. And that involves a different design approach also. So you're going to take that same skin data you'd get for designing a skid plate, and then you're going to turn some of it into physical surfaces you can use in your CAD modeling. And you're going to maybe cut with that surface so it fits perfectly. But everything is usually surface models, which if anyone you know in engineering has talked about surface modeling before, most people,
specifically in SolidWorks.
Yeah, SolidWorks.
most people don't do it.
Yeah,
It's
rough.
usually just a kind of unique modeling.
Well, you don't use it unless, I mean, any machine componentry or anything like that, you're not going to be doing any surface modeling.
Right. That's the very polarizing difference between, say, the skid plate and the exterior stuff. I mean, yeah, you can get away with a plane and some circles for the mounting bolts and everything like that, and that's all you need. And then meanwhile, Kevin.
Right. For a skid plate or a trunco spoiler, it's a completely different approach.
Yeah. Very different approach. And now we spent a lot of time with carbon fiber stuff, and now we're getting into just like a more affordable version of that in the vacuum forming stuff. So we take plastic ABS sheet and vacuum form it as it's heated, gets vacuum formed over a mold, so you essentially end up with a plastic part that is free-form shaped to whatever you designed those surfaces to. So you get the same look without the cost, basically, because everyone wants, the awesome exterior bits you can add onto your car nice and easy, but they don't want to pay the carbon fiber tax. And that really just comes down to manufacturing process, right? And material cost also. So that's going back again to the making compromises thing. So we can have the expensive option that's the best and say here's your carbon fiber part, clips into OEM bits, whatever it is, and then that's $800. Costs a lot of money. The mold's cost is huge. And then you can have...
I mean, there's no way around to do that. I mean, the carbon fiber stuff, that's all hand laid.
Right.
I mean, there's really no automation to that.
Yeah, you can't just
No.
have that part of an assembly line.
I think it's really cool that you guys not only can design aesthetic material, but also performance materials. And I think that's something unique, perhaps, about our company is that it's diverse. And correct me if I'm wrong, do engineers usually focus on one type of thing? So, aesthetics or performance, or it's usually pretty varied?
So that's the tricky part, is there's definitely, we each, I think, are admittedly better at certain things than others. But there's nothing worse than just getting stuck in doing repetitive, the same old thing every day. Sorry, Kevin.
Oh, no.
You're out of it now, but there was a
it's
wave you went through of doing a lot of carbon fiber
A lot of carbon fiber
versus
stuff.
the variety. But otherwise, in engineering elsewhere, you are kind of pigeonholed into doing the same thing.
So I really enjoy that, and being able to kind of switch it up, switch gears every once in a while, do something a little bit different is very very nice.
Yeah, we're split up by brand, so we're not split up by skill set.
Mm-hmm.
That really helps us learn off of each other, learn about different manufacturing processes and stuff. So I've covered everything from performance parts to aesthetic parts and everything in between. While I've been working here, there just happens to be some good lulls in, differentiation at times because we get hooked on, here's our new manufacturing process that we really want to hit hard, like the vacuum forming stuff. So because it's profitable, because it's cheap and easy for the consumer, because people like it. That's something we want to expand on as much as we can, versus saying, let's go make the most expensive, very
Yeah, like the intake manifold's a good example. I mean, we're not going to, realistically, we're not going to sell a ton of those things. And yeah, sure, I'm excited about it. But I mean, it's going to be an expensive part that's not for everybody. And yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of time to design something like that, to design it well. Meanwhile, some of the carbon stuff and the ABS stuff, I mean, they don't necessarily have to be that complex. It's not.
Sure.
Well, it's also, the learning curve is pretty steep, especially with solid modeling. I mean, surface modeling.
Yeah.
So, we've each done carbon fiber parts, and your first one, I know each of you will do the same thing. If you go look back through that model, you're going to be hating everything you did.
Boy, it's like the embarrassing modifications at the beginning. Boy, you go back and look at some of your full circle.
Yeah, absolutely the same process. There's things you learn so quickly by doing it that you really are able to refine your process, and then on top of it, learning off of each other, you become increasingly efficient with it. So
yeah, and I mean, while we are broken up by brand, in terms of projects, I mean, at the end of the day, we're reviewing all of our projects together. We're bouncing all the designs and prints and everything off of each other for both, review and approval and all that stuff. So yeah, we all have eyes on each of our projects, which is cool. And we're just getting better every day.
How does a project get started? Do the higher ups come up and say, hey, we've looked at our data, we need a Volkswagen intake for 5, 6, and 7s?
That's kind of how it used to be, but now, I
mean, it comes from everywhere. It comes
from
it
can be from anywhere, but it's no top-down directive at this point.
No,
it's whatever they assess. The brand teams, we each have our separate brand teams that are up front in the building here. They assess current sales, whether it be a part that's failing and we're selling a ton of them as replacements, or they see a void in the aftermarket availability of trunk-lip spoilers on a certain model. Whatever void they see that seems justifiable and profitable, they'll come up with a project idea from that. And whether whoever comes up with that idea doesn't really matter. Sometimes it could be a kid in the warehouse. It's like, hey, I think a spoiler for this makes sense.
Yeah, feedback comes from everywhere. Customers, forums, Facebook posts.
Right. It gets run through the same group up front to make sure that it is a viable product before you do it. It's not just...
If there's 10 people that are interested in a very specific type of part, we're probably not going to pursue it. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, filling voids where the market needs what we're producing is what we try to concentrate on.
Right. I mean, heck, we develop products like kind of out of circumstance for, we could be taking apart a car in the shop to install some other part that we developed and figure out that there's some sort of inherent weakness in a car and a part, something that we see an opportunity in, and we say, hey, yeah, we make this out of billet instead, and that's how that happens. So yeah, it comes from all over the place. So
final question, we're running out of time here. Do you have a dream part you would love to design? Mike, you mentioned that you're kind of restricted by cost, even brand. If you could design a part for, we'll stick within your brand, if you could design any part for BMW without a limitation of manufacturing or cost, what would it be? Your dream part?
I don't know. It's not like a byproduct of the limitation that really sways it at this point. Like, we need those constraints to properly design something. So that's the tricky part. Like, yeah, you can make the most complicated part or the most intricate thing, but that doesn't mean it's the best. So having that cost constraint really kind of strives you to make the best product for that void. So that's kind of, you need that to feel successful at it, I feel like. But I don't know. I haven't gotten into I think we've discussed doing some turbo manifolds. That'd be cool.
Oh man, you stole it from me. I was thinking, I was like, man, this is really all coming together. Because I'm thinking back to my turbo manifold, and I want redemption. I want redemption for my stick welded manifold. So
yeah.
Everyone likes turbo manifolds.
Yeah, right.
You can get a nice piece with some nice machine flanges and
pretty well
scheduled stainless welds and all that stuff, and make it look like a fancy octopus. And but again, the no constraint thing really just is almost makes the question too broad.
Mhm.
Right.
So
What's on that part? Do you have a component that has pushed your limits the most? Like for me, I think the most extravagant thing I've done was the CSL carbon fiber intake. That was one of the more tricky things as far as modeling, as far as trying to hit a price point, complexity. But
That
I
is
don't know if
crazy.
either of you have one of those type of things where it's like this pushed my boundary, or like came close to. I know there's always the next one too. So like once you
Yeah,
get
I
out of
mean-
the way, I don't know.
I guess my current one is probably intercoolers. That one's just all around. Wasn't a difficult thing to design or model, but figuring out manufacturing weaknesses, essentially, how, to adapt for, because we use cast end tanks on a majority of those, and figuring out, I can model it perfect, but
What you're actually going to get.
what you're going to get is not going to be what you modeled exactly, and figuring out how to make all that work. That's been a challenge recently. And again, part of it is also, so many different applications, being a Volkswagen. And then, the testing on that was pretty elaborate in terms of both long-term test and performance testing. We did, a lot of dyno data comparison there. So that was pretty data driven, but it's a recent one for me.
I don't know if I have a particular Halo project that I'm interested in, but I know some of the exterior stuff has pushed my boundaries in the past, and it's worked out in a good way for the company as a whole. It's because we've really brought that product line to every brand now, and that was something that when I started here was it was in its very early stages, and it's come a long way. So I guess, that's what pushed the boundary for me. That was my biggest learning experience here.
Well, they can be
Right.
very infuriating too. Making
Oh,
small
boy.
changes to a surface model is just the worst thing ever.
Nothing has been entirely complex. We're not building like CNC heads or anything for these engines. So without
Not that I
that,
wouldn't like to.
okay. Well, if you'd like to, maybe that's
No, what I
maybe
would
that's
really
the
like
Halo
to do
project.
is do like our like an in-house brand of like connecting rods, and then test till failure.
Ooh,
That'd be a good one.
that'd be good.
I gotta know how much power they hold.
Yeah, that'd be a great video series.
Yeah.
Blowing stuff up.
Yeah. Cool, guys. All right. Well, we're about out of time. So thanks for tuning in, and check us out on the next one.